Okay, well, I'll start introducing our guests while we're waiting for Quentin to join us. First, thanks. Nice to meet you all in person, for those I didn't meet already. I'm going to start with you, Anastasia. Anastasia, you are the co-founder of POSAIS, an artificial intelligence platform designed to provide innovative solutions in various fields, such as data analysis, process automation, and user experience enhancements. We're going to move into Jonathan. Jonathan is here. Program Director at ERT Saint-Exupéry. This is a research institute and an accelerator of science, technological research, and transfer to the aerospace and space industries in Toulouse, if I'm right. I'm from Toulouse, that's why. Quentin is here. Hi, Quentin.
Hello.
Last but not least, Quentin is... Hi. Good to see you again. Quentin is the CEO of Clever Cloud, an IT automation company focusing on developer productivity and hosting quality, and also a partner of this event. Thank you so much, Quentin. Manuel is a PhD candidate and a research scientist. You are specialized in natural language processing and the privacy of machine learning model. And when we talked, you told me that you were quite strong about open source and really, really deep into that. So I'm kind of excited to know what we will share with us. So, yeah, Alexandre?
Just one thing. There is a Wi-Fi.
Sure, yes. Yes, you mentioned that. Indeed, let's share the Wi-Fi. So you can find, the network's name is Mazarium, and you can access it with, Mazarium 2025, all in main letters, Mazarium 2025. Should work. So going back into the roundtable, Victor. Victor, you used to be leading AI and machine learning at research Mozilla.ai. You are a machine learning engineer, and you research focusing on scaling AI in the financial industry. And you have been working quite recently on explainability of AI, as well as the open source AI question. And you have been one of the main co-author of a research paper recently published. And I think we do have everyone? Sorry, I'm just. Oh no. Enguerrand. I didn't introduce you. Sorry, I was quite sure I did introduce you. So we have Enguerrand from Arkea Crédit Mutuel, who will tell us a bit more about concrete example and uses of AI. So nice to meet you. This is the great shift as OpenAI surpassed proprietary AI. In the previous roundtable, we had a quick overview of what successful open source can look like. Let's explore that field further, because this is such a large one. So we would like to start with the comparison with proprietary LLM. We had the mention from that with Jonathan on how is it possible or not possible to do the comparison, because we do always compare, but it's hard to find how to do that. In the second part, we'll dig into concrete examples, Croissant LLM, what you've been doing, Enguerrand and Anastasia, your works on common corpus. Then the question of infrastructure, because this is really concrete, Quentin, and the question of acceptance, thanks to all of that. And in part 3, we will go into recommendation, the future. Victor, we would like to have your input about open source and how we can integrate them better into business. So let's start with you, Jonathan. Why do we compare, and what can we learn from it?
It's a really good question. You mentioned I'm a director at IRT Saint-Exupéry. I'm leading a research project with Anity, the cluster AI in Toulouse. And we do a lot of benchmarking and comparing models. But I also have another hat, which is I come from Thales, the space branch, Thales Space. So I will take both point of view from the industry and from the research. And you have to know, I think there's two things. When we compare a proprietary model with open source, usually we don't do that for any use cases. Both have really specific use cases. You have use cases for proprietary models and use cases that are not doable with proprietary models, and you are looking for open source for that. In an industry like Airbus or Thales, of course, you cannot use OpenAI for some of your use cases because of sovereignty, because you have to know what is inside. If you want to deploy a LLM in a defense center to control a satellite, to control troops, you have to know what is inside, what are the data it's trained on, what are the bias, either gender bias, political bias inside your data. And of course, you have to know what is even the proportion between technology, scientific knowledge in your data in regards to the proportion of the number of tweets from Trump or Elon Musk, for instance. And this is the kind of thing you need. So this market is not doable with proprietary data. So it's not a market that you can do, but you should rely on open source for that. On the other hand, there is some market that is really difficult to penetrate as open source solution if you need a lot of infrastructure to deploy at scale. That's why it's difficult to summarize the meetings with teams with only open source, because you need all the infrastructure and all the tooling, which is not only the model, but everything that is around. So from the industry point of view, usually it's not a question of comparing, it's just a question of deciding in what part of the market you are. When you do want to compare, that's the difficult part, because you usually don't compare only the model. Comparing open source and proprietary is not comparing just the LLM. You have a lot of things you want to compare. You have embeddings model, you have tooling for agents, for Llama index, for RAG, and so on. So you need to compare all of that, and you have metrics, you have benchmark. Most of the time, these benchmark and metrics, they are not really suited to your needs. If you look at the benchmark that you can find, MMLU, the classical benchmark you find in the press about LLMs, they contain a lot of information about who is the president of US and so on, but not that much about your technical issues. That's why you need collaborative open source approach, even for evaluation of models.
Thank you so much. So you were highlighting the importance of both markets, markets for proprietary and a market for open source model. Maybe could you dig a bit, and this is also something I would like to hear from you, Victor, where do open source already surpass proprietary? What kind of use cases? Where is it that relevant? In really 30 seconds, so we can turn to Victor.
Okay, I start and I send you the mic. It's clear that the easiest is when you don't need the compute horsepower of a large model. So at the moment, there is a clear victory of open source in small language models, specific model language. Even in agentic, we've seen a lot of things happening in the domain, from Hugging Face and so on. And so in these kind of things, open source is clearly a winner. And the nice thing about data, the previous panel really mentioned how important it is to give your data and focus on sharing data. It's because it compounds somehow. If you start to have a data set that is filtered and improved with synthetic generation and so on, the dataset community compounds and increase, and the models, they get better and better. And that's why we start having huge models, larger models that are bigger. It's because it takes time to create the data and to have the same data as these kind of proven companies.
Thank you. Victor, in 30 seconds.
Yes, in 30 seconds, just...
it's because I want to hear you at the last part, like, quite a lot, that's why.
Of course. I would like to thank Linagora for organizing the summit. I think it's like really a timely moment to discuss those critical topics. On the kind of comparisons between different LLMs and leaderboards, and is open source better than closed source? I think so. We've been studied specifically in the safety domain, the safeguard LLMs, and we were thinking about how to build like one-to-one comparisons between open and closed source safeguard LLMs. So those LLMs are trained to be filters either between like the input and the model, or after the output of the model, to do content moderations or among other things. And this is really difficult because you don't have, as Jonathan said it, like a one-to-one comparisons between black box systems and open models. You want to look into the different policies, for example, for content moderation, on which the different models have been trained on, and we don't have any standards. So first, like, to be able to compare and to discuss the trade-offs between the different LLMs, you need to have good evaluation standards. And right now, for some critical fields like safety, we don't have them yet.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn, so we can move into part 2 and concrete example. I'm going to turn very quickly to you, Quentin. What does the ecosystem lack to accelerate and really say to the world, we are in the race and we are doing great?
I think one point is important is in open source we all have the best building blocks of many things. If you take, for example, the operating system, we have the best kernel, then the best system manager, then the best window manager and stuff. But the grouping together is complicated. And in the open source model, in the open source AI, we have the same problem. A foundation model is just a foundation model. It does nothing by itself. If you want to have a conversation with it, you need to have the instruct model on top of that. But if you want to use the model, you need to have the chat system and a way for this system to access the information of the company, have memory, authentication, all the building around that, what we call the infrastructure of using the AI. The infrastructure of using the AI is the way you can use everything to embed the AI inside the application and inside a software. Today, one of the lack on the open source level is the lack of infrastructure of supportive service around that. It's what we have decided to do at Clever Cloud. We have partner with a company called Cloud Appim and make something called Otoroshi, and it's a full service we do which is called Clever AI, but it's all open source. It's the building blocks of the infrastructure you need to use this. And it's exactly the same problem we have in the all open source, is how we built a product around all this great technology together. And that's the first point of the infrastructure. The other part is about the inference and the training, and maybe we will discuss this later. But the first thing, why we need to push further, we need to push further because we need to create product from great open source product. And that's something important. But what will happen is the easily integration of all the AI open source model will lead that many products integrating AI will integrate in the open source one. So that means that there is no opposition between the proprietary and the open source market. The two will lead together to the competition, and because of the easily of the embedding of open source, there is no world where open source artificial intelligence will be discarded. It's here for a big market to stay, because it will be the open source you use every day. You will not know it because you will still using ChatGPT, I don't know what, but all the open source you will use in many products will be coming from the open source AI. So I think the first thing we need to understand about that is it's a market that you cannot discard, and then how we can build all the infrastructure you need to use it in the context of the company, and that's what we are focusing on Clever Cloud, and we will integrate Lucy, for example, inside this kind of stuff.
Thank you so much, Quentin. Let's move into the action that we were all asking for and concrete examples. Manuel, Anastasia, and Enguerrand, you've all been working on very concrete, open source AI. Anastasia, I would love for you to tell us a bit more about POSAIS and Common Corpus and how you've been managing to build things that go beyond the foundation and just the foundation.
Yeah, so, well, actually, the two poor parents of the open source AI are data and evaluation. And this is where we actually wanted to start with. And before doing fine-tunes, before doing things like this, actually start with the data. And opening and making available the data which could be used by the larger community, both for training of foundation models, fine-tuning, and even actually alignment in some cases. So this was the vision behind the Common Corpus, which, as of now, the biggest corpus available there for training large language models. So over 2 trillion tokens. in multiple European languages, which is also quite a differentiating point. Over 20% of French, which is quite amazing. And basically, what is different between, let's say, the common corpus and, for example, the pile? The pile was there for already some years. There are other corpora that you can find on Hugging Face and which are kind of open source. The problem is that they were all based on common crawl. And how do you actually ensure that the data that you find in common crawl is not copyrighted? As of now, I don't know how you can actually do it. There are so many replica of copyrighted content across the common crawl. It's not just a question of getting rid of the links. And why I'm saying is that, why is this important? It's not that we are being purist about the copyright law. Oh my God, we have to respect it. I personally might believe that at some day it will disappear and we'll be more communist, intellectually speaking, but it's another question. It is important because if we do not ensure that that there is no copyrighted content, these corpora are super fragile. This has already happened with the pile. The pile was one of the biggest training sets collected by Eleftherii. It consisted of quite some copyrighted books. And actually, you could say, okay, in the US, for example, you have the exceptions actually allowing for probably training on even this kind of content. And in Europe, you have text and mining exceptions, right? So what's the problem? But this corpus was taken down. So if we want to have any kind of sustainable development of the open source community around the open data, we do need to take this into account. And this is about social acceptability of the data that we put out there. The second differentiating factor of what we did with the common corpus is actually, well, preparing this data, actually ameliorating the OCR. We had huge amounts of public domain that was horrible. Yes, those books were digitized in the mid-2000s. Yes, the OCR is really horrible. We also had lots of public domain where we had some, let's say, texts which are not socially or culturally acceptable today. So do we put it out there and say that it's ready to be used for training? We published it separately, Toxicity Commons. And what is quite specific is that it's not just about putting the data, the corpora out there. It's ensuring that they are usable for a long amount of time and that people have the tools to continue working with the data. This is why in parallel with the common corpus, we also open sourced quite some models which we have ourselves used to prepare this corpus, basically the toxicity filtering, which is multilingual and very new. There is nothing like this on the market because all models are very sensitive to only specific words, not to the context. PI filtering, personal information, is a very important and non-resolved issue for European languages. Layout detection, all these kind of things, all these tools are needed for the community. So this was the initiative that, well, actually allowed us to also meet quite awesome people around Europe who contributed their data, who helped us collect some of the forsaken by God repositories out there. So yes, and this allowed us, in the end of the day, to train world's first models, trained exclusively on open data, meaning data with permissive license.
Thank you so much. And I think that it's perfect for Enguerrand to step in and maybe say a bit more about, I mean, you've been working quite a lot on Bloom, if I recall correctly, and you've been working at the AI for IT initiative as well. I mean, what you've been doing within Crédit Mutuel Arkea, you know, the platform talk, all of that are very concrete, you know, models that are already out in the field. How did you make those stories success stories, and how can you make that work and be sustainable, as Anastasia mentioned?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, like in Crédit Mutuel Arkea, so we are a group of bank and insurance, and I'm currently like leading an initiative around AI for IT inside the group. So building and deploying AI tools for developers and IT people. And as we have mentioned, the group is really active in the open source environment. We have done different releases in terms of models, inference servers, and also the Talk platform. I will talk maybe a little bit later. And we really have this vision that the first thing I think we need to talk about is like the AI Act. We are, as a bank, we are working in a regulated environment. We have controlled, and we are being audited, and we really have this need of explainability. And the AI Act say like basically that you need to understand the output of your model, and you need really like to understand it. And if you don't understand it, and if you don't know what you are doing with your models and how your models are working, then you can have fine, and the fine is really high. I mean, AI Act says that basically you can have a fine up to 7% of your global revenue. We are talking about dozens of millions of dollars if you're using that kind of model for high-risk use cases. As said Jonathan, there is no war between like open source or closed source. It just depends of the projects, right? And when we are talking on high-risk projects, so for example, let's say credit score analysis or hiring process or fraud detection, it's totally impossible for us to use closed source models, and then we need to use something else, something where we have explainability, and this is where open source is coming and is solving this problem. And so that was really clear for us. I mean, it's not even an idea or a philosophy, it's just a need. We need to be compliant to the AI Act, and the only way to be compliant with the AI Act is to use open source models, and that's why we have decided to go really strongly on this path, and we have released, as you said, different open source models. Most of them are based on a Bloom model. It's a fine-tuned Bloom's version in French. We have been really proud, like a year and a half ago, to release the first Bloom's version fine-tuned on French data. And then we have continued in that path. And so just to be, we have released different steps. The first one was to release a data set. So we have released an open data set, like focusing on PDF, because like most of the models are trained on data sets that are focusing, like, for example, it's great you can say that this is a cat or this is like a dog, but we are working with PDF, we are working with charts, we are working with figures, and we have released a data set that is focusing on archive PDF. So that was the first release. Then, thanks to this data set, we have been able to fine-tune a layout detection model. And this layout detection model is basically able to say, this is a chart, this is a figure, you know. So that was the second step. And then what we have released is, and all of this is open source, right? You just like to check our Hugging Face page and GitHub page, and you will see all that. And then the third step was about doing captioning on images and figures, and so we have also open source 2 other models able to do captioning on that kind of data. And then you can see that we have done the data sets, then how to ingest documents, and then the third step was about building like ODQA, so to query on these documents. And what we have released are 3 models, like Bloom's model fine-tuned on like retriever, then re-ranking, and finally Guardway. And all these models also been open source, and thanks to this we really have like a full solution. And we have decided like to go even further by releasing Bloom's inference server on our GitHub. So basically you can really easily deploy these 3 re-ranking, retriever, and Guardway models on these inference servers. All of this is open source. And on this strategy, we are also working since, like, I think 2017 on the Talk project, which is the open source conversational kit. This thing has been made possible thanks to the TOSIT, which is an alliance between major actors in France, for example, as EDF, SNCF, Orange, Crédit Mutuel Arkea, BPCE, and we have pushed this project. And this project is building bots, like chatbots, and AI agents and conversational agents. And so you see that we have released almost all the stack. And as said before, it's not just about open weights or open datasets, it's about an open system, really an end-to-end open system, and that's where we are going. And we are going there in part because we have the AI Act, and we need to be able to understand what we are doing.
Thank you so much. So to put in a nutshell, you find the way of avoid being fined while still working on business efficiency. This was kind of like the goal.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the strategies, is that we are in a regulated environment, so we need to be compliant, and we have to find a strategy to be compliant and to innovate.
Definitely. I'll move towards Manuel. Manuel, you've been working quite a lot on Croissant LLM. Can you tell us what it is, how it was working on that, what were the challenges, and how did you make it a success story?
Yes, of course. So thanks, Leila. So Croissant is a tiny language model, so a small language model. The idea is that it's able to run on your phone. And we trained it about a year ago. And the idea is to compensate the small size by training it for a lot of data. And initially it was both a research project. We were interested in seeing what happened when we put a lot of non-English data in this type of model. Usually these models are trained with 90% English data. What happens if you go 50-50? Does the cultural kind of biases of these models change, etc.? Does the knowledge that is integrated within these models change? So that was interesting to us. And doing this, we also wanted to do a model that could be used by people for industrial use cases, and so we decided to train for a long time to make it as good as possible. And then everything we did was also very transparent. We open sourced everything from the model to all the intermediate checkpoints, the data, the code. Every single process was documented. So we tried to really be super transparent about all of this. And I think maybe a nice question is why is it interesting for these type of projects to be fully open sourced? And I think there's several reasons that kind of make this project interesting from an open source perspective. And the first one is, since it's a research project, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to have something that's reproducible, as some people were talking about this morning, that people can also build upon. Croissant, even though nowadays the model is probably not used that much, a lot of the foundations to build it, the code, the data, has been reused in other projects. So recently there's a bigger European LLM called EuroLLM that has used a lot of the resources. Lucy as well has used some of the data, some of the code, I think. So this is a nice thing to see when you're building something and people reuse it. It's always nice. Also, of course, funding. I mean, nowadays these models use a lot of money, and being in France and having the opportunity to work on these projects also comes with the fact that you're going to want to do some things that are just not for you, but for everyone, and getting funding from Jean-Zé for these type of projects is super capital. And then more from a research perspective, having a lot of transparency enabled a lot of future uses. Typically, you were talking about copyright, Anastasia, and one of the projects that we built with Croissant is that we integrated certain sequences of text, of false private information, to be able to see what does the model memorize, and to be able to see if you repeat the data 1, 10, 100 times, at what point does the model learn, what are the risks associated, and to be able to drive decisions with this. So having everything open source, everything transparent, all the checkpoints makes this possible. And then maybe the last point I want to make is that not only for Croissant, but for all the other kind of open source projects I worked on, I saw that having things open source drives use a lot. People are able to use it, test it, have no constraint on the utilization, as you were saying, Enguerrand. But also, some of the projects I have on GitHub, people are actively using it and fixing bugs and extending it and training it and fine-tuning it. And so a lot of the use, all of the capabilities, a lot of the performance comes from the fact the things are open source, people can build around it, people can use it, and then it's not always a competition. One of the projects we have recently on more visual embedding models, we were kind of trying to be the first to arrive to a nice fine-tuned models with another team. We both open sourced everything, and then we combined kind of the strengths, and now we have kind of the best combined model out there, which is kind of state of the art in the category. So sometimes collaboration also helps a lot. So.
Thank you so much, Manuel, which leads me to the question of, you were mentioning that people get to test it, get to reproduce it. We don't know exactly how many use this kind of model, but they are using the brother, the uncle, or like the son of this model. So what we were saying earlier, Quentin, was about inference and technique and foundation just being the foundation. If we want to get people to use more, if we want those models to scale, we do need more. We do need accessibility, and this is what you've been working on quite a lot at Clever Cloud. Would you mind getting a bit more into details when it comes to the infrastructure and all the variables and the bricks that are needed for the infrastructure?
From an infrastructure point of view, AI is very interesting because we do have no computing power. For few years, we never have problems of capacity of computing and storage. And I have made something interesting is computing power is an interesting topic again. So basically, if you divide, you need some specific capability when you train the model, and it's a computing power which is huge, like an enormous, and that's why Jean-Zé have been used. But Jean-Zé is a very small calculator if you compare to what's XAI from Elon Musk or from Meta or for what Azure used by OpenAI have. It's a huge computing power, and what's happened is this market is shifting. For years, data centers have become something which is very classical and standard. But what's happening is, with this kind of computing power, the amount of energy you need is very important. So you need basically to sync your data center with the silicium inside and the energy facility nearby. And that's why Microsoft have now bought a nuclear power plant just near a data center and relaunch it just to be able to have the energy they need. So what will happen in the training business is we will define energy power plant data center equipped with all the computing power, and it will become a market a little bit like semiconductor facilities, where you will have bindings on the capacity plan and the timing, and people will be in auction to get the production capacity plan of the training system, and there will be few data centers in the world that will be the training, and that will be the new era of supercalculator for the training. And then there is the inference, is when you use the model. And what's happening today is we use the GPU of NVIDIA for the inference, but to be fair, it's not really made for that. So you are using about a percentage of the capacity of the system, and it's not used for that. And what's happening is it's too expensive because the NVIDIA chip is expensive, but also the energy you use is expensive. So from an industrial point of view, we are going to do the design to cost of the AI, and we will use specific chipset. The breakthrough of OpenAI is nearly 3 years ago, and making a chip is about 3 and more years to make. So this year, you will have a lot of artificial intelligence coprocessor that will break through. There is many providers in the market, but they will divide around 7 to 8 the amount of energy you need to run them. And you will have inside traditional facilities of data centers, new type of machine with the coprocessor for AI, which designed to cost the ability to use the AI on many industrial cases, because it will be sustainable from a financial point of view to use it. So we will have this design to cost era of the AI through the inference, which will be the biggest part of the computing power used by the AI in the few years to come. So this year will be the pivot plan. Why is it important? It's because we need to be able to get all the AI we use, able to use new type of accelerators, and that will be redefining the way you use AI. Many point of the AI today is ad hoc solution with a lot of duct tape and many things so that it can work, and the demo work, and you can demonstrate what you can bring to the value to the people. But now we will industrialize the way we build the model, we use the model, we industrialize the computing model, and that's why we have creating a big consortium around Clever Cloud called Multiply, where the people of ZDML.ai, which are rebuilding the blocks, with the people of Vesora, which are building the accelerator, with the people of Cyper, which are building the CPU, with the people of Calre, which are building the networking power, with the people of the Institut Mines Telecom, and so on, so on. So we're building a lot of things around that, integrating, of course, Linagora, and all we are working on this kind of stuff, because what we'll be doing there is the industrialization of what we do on AI, and it will design to cost efficiency and able to be used in many industries. So this year will be the pivot year to the real use case of AI, and no more showcasing and demonstrate the value, but actually applying the value to industrial cases, and at a cost that will be sustainable for the industry you're targeting. So I think it's very important to see that as an industrial point of view, infrastructure, then how to embed the AI inside the software, and how to design to cost everything so it can be good, and that will be where the open source will triumph, because common goods on digital market is always the only way where we win. If you think about that, if I say like 20 years ago, Microsoft will sell some Linux, everybody in the room will be laughing. Today, Microsoft is selling more Linux than Microsoft. So basically, we know open source always triumph and always win. We are a little bit lacking of starting process, but at the end, we know we will win.
Thank you so much, Quentin, which makes me want to turn to you, Jonathan, because when it comes to industries and when it comes to having the capacity to do things in a sustainable way, in a robust and in a safe way, I would think that space is definitely where no mistakes is allowed, and where things have to get the best standard when it comes to security, when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to efficiency. I would like then from you to bounce back on what was Quentin saying, the question of the continuum and the inference phase, maybe the question of the maintenance as well, and how this question of industrialization from someone who's working in the field of aerospace and space, what do you think about that?
It's a main point, main argument in going proprietary. I mean, you are buying Google or Microsoft Cloud because you know that there will be a lot of maintenance that you won't have to do. On the other hand, if you want to do something that is not in their baseline products, then you're blocked. You cannot do that. So at some point, if you want to control what is inside, you have no choice to do it yourself, or to find friends and go on partnerships, big programs or consortium and so on. And in this kind of consortium, usually you tend to have actors that are placed specifically on the industrialization part and the maintenance part, because it's not the job of companies like Thales to maintain open source software, for instance. Just on the point of frugality, I think it's something that is really important for companies now. It wasn't the case a couple of years ago. Of course, in space domain, we don't want to put LLM in satellites, but at the moment. But it's a question of costs. I mean, energy is not free anymore. Maybe it was in the past, but it's not the case. So it's part of the cost to have solutions that don't solve all the problems in the world, but are specific to your domain and cost less. And that means usually doing something almost from scratch. Training, fine-tuning from scratch, or doing something that is really specific to your domain, and you cannot do that with proprietary solution. You have to use open source for this kind of thing.
Thank you so much about that. I would like to turn to the question of acceptance, because the question of comfort, the question of maintenance, they are all, you know, like kind of weighing down with the question of acceptance and what we can allow and, you know, what is good for the people. Anastasia, you kind of mentioned that at the beginning of your talk. I would like for you to maybe go a bit deeper on why is the question of acceptance so important? Why is the question of the data and how, you know, we manage the data so important to get the acceptance that we need so we can have, you know, industrialization, we can get more and more general business to use those kind of tools?
Well, so when we talk about AI acceptability, and I just want to probably narrow it down to large language models acceptability, which is not the same thing. We need to understand that in the organizational settings, the acceptability passes by either the fact that people do know how the system interact with them and how they can interact with them, right? And so here, the understanding of potential biases of the systems are an interesting question. But more specifically, knowing that the systems, they have integrated or not integrated your own organizational practices, norms, representations, etc. Right? So in the use cases that we have been seeing specifically with the public services, the question of giving the users the power and the capacity to understand on what sources, on what data these large language models base their responses off has been salutary. I will give you just one example of the Ministry of Education, for which we have developed an HR assistant. And the fact that the assistant always formulated the responses basing itself of the sources that have been pre-selected, that have been vetted by the HR specialists themselves, has been something that actually allowed for a much smoother, a much faster acceptance. And I'll go even further. It actually allowed to lower down the number of, let's say, the disputes between the teachers and the HR specialist, so that in the end of the day, the syndicates had even had to call the teachers and say, why not you filing any more complaints? Why it's so good? Like, so it's kind of insane that it could that it helped to work this thing so well. So I think that this acceptability, it will necessarily pass by the transparency of the data and transparency of the systems. And when you are using proprietary AI systems, think Claude, think ChatGPT, etc., you never actually know out of what kind of systemic representations, what kind of, let's say, yes, well, even cultural zeitgeist, if I may, they do base themselves off. And this changes. So, and probably just to finish off with this, of course there is a gradation of openness. Because, for example, if you take as an example the recent Quen models, the DeepSeek models, well, so basically, those are open weight models. We do not know what they are trained on. And when you actually interact with those models and you ask them very basic questions for Western people, okay, so tell me a little bit more about Tiananmen Square protests, these very powerful models, they do refuse to answer. Right? So this is a very simple example to give, very simple. When you actually start, for example, working with Claude or with ChatGPT at scale, you actually see things which are more troubling because it's even more difficult to understand where some kind of responses and their constraints and the alignment is coming from, yes. Right? So transparency is the way to the acceptability because the acceptability is being enlightened enough and to have sufficient information to be free to choose. And actually, we do need to choose even bias models. It's okay. It's okay to choose a bias models because those are language models. And language systems are fundamentally biased because, well, I mean, they do contain the world systems that we have constructed during the ages. So yes.
Thank you so much, which makes me want to give the mic to Victor. Victor, you've been working a lot on safety around open source AI, and safety is obviously one of the key things for acceptability and for the capacity to scale and do better things within the ecosystem. You've been working on quite a lot with different researchers around the world on a research paper. Another version is about to be published. Maybe you can share a bit of the insights with us?
Yes, so in 2 words, I think it's a key problem, and we have seen it emerged maybe 1 year and a half ago around a paper from MIT, I think, and bio risks and bioweapons. And actually, friends at Princeton showed very clearly that all the information that was at the time provided by the model was also freely accessible on Wikipedia. And so we started thinking about really how to address this problem of risks, which is also a problem of acceptance, from the perspective of marginal additional risks of open source compared to closed source, and not just the risks of open source completely out of the box. And when we think with this kind of framework, we see that things are much more relative than absolute disaster coming from open source AI. Maybe one specific example that we've been discussing is the example around the fine-tuning APIs. So those APIs are, for example, provided by main AI labs and completely closed, and you send to the system a data set, and it will return a trained or a fine-tuned model with the data sets. And Stanford researchers really showed twice that they could send harmful data sets to the fine-tuning APIs and get back a harmful model. They warned the large AI labs about it. They claimed that it was fixed, but they were able to reproduce the experiment maybe a couple of months later. So those things are difficult. Of course, open source can help a lot. But I think yes, the mental model of understanding risk, the marginal additional risks compared to closed source is a good one.
Thank you. And I think in the paper we were also discussing quite a lot about graduation of openness and, of course, how it applies to risk. The idea now is to maybe move forward and give recommendations for the future. How can open source AI be better integrated into business? What are your recommendations? Again, this is an event ahead of the Action Summit. The idea is to really nurture the discussion and give recommendations. From Manuel and Enguerrand, who both been, how can I say that, playing with the models quite a lot, what will be your very concrete recommendations for, let's say, the next 6 months, for the community, for the regulator? What would you wish to see happen that can be, as you say, you are into small models and things that people can have on their phone, accessibility, something really concrete and really that we can achieve. I mean, of course, we all wish European people to unite and have, billions, but that's not really into our reach here. Maybe it is. Do you have something you would wish for that people in this room could act on?
I think probably the biggest thing is a question of incentives. We're in a society where a lot of the decisions are made based on, is it going to be worth it from a financial perspective? And if people understand that there's more at stakes than just making money, then it maybe gives you incentives to finance some of these projects that are not necessarily going to make a lot of money, but are going to push the field towards in the right direction. Hugging Face, for example, is a private company, but has been a great accelerator for a lot of these open source projects. But even then, they have financial constraints, and so recently, for example, things that were completely free have become more into like a freemium like tier where now you have to pay for some of the storage. I mean, it was amazing that it was free before, but I guess like if kind of people realize that it's important and that it can accelerate your growth, then you begin to have some of these dynamics that become interesting for everyone. I don't really have some concrete examples, but just the understanding that it can be worth it.
Thank you. Enguerrand?
Yeah, so that's the beginning of the year, so it's time for wishes, and maybe I have like one wish for the next months or for this year. We were talking about AI Act and auditable models, and I think what will be amazing, and as far as I know it doesn't exist, is to have the possibility to have auditable models deployed on the cloud, and you just consume it as a model as a service. So you pay, for example, for token, but this model will be auditable. When I say auditable, I don't say open models, or I don't say open data source, but I mean that me as a customer, if I'm paying for the models and if I have an audit, we can have access to the models and to the data. And that will be amazing, because nowadays we are mixing like open source versus closed source, and like on-premise deployment and cloud deployment. And if this wish comes true, you can like interact with top models without having to deploy it, maintain it. But if you are audited, you can just have the access to the data and the models, and that will be amazing, honestly.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to you, Quentin. From what I've heard from you, I'm not, I cannot guess anything, but when we could talk about recommendation and get better integration into business, is maybe to consider open source as a business market and not getting confused about, that could be ethical or, like good for like people and the planet. What you're saying that open source is needed as an industry need, as a business need, like would that be something you would wish for the ecosystem to understand better?
For me, it's exactly like the point of privacy. Privacy is a business model, and that's why it's important to apply GDPR in Europe, because privacy is a business model. Open source is a business model, and what's important is the humanist values that drive Europe's can be a business model to provide great products that the world need. So the first thing we need to understand that today we need to imply these values inside the software to be able to culturally shift the world through a world which will be more sustainable, more ethical, and more humanist. But more, if we think about the wishes and what we need to do right now, for decades, the industry of digital have been ditched in France. That's something which is virtual, for the geeks, something like that. The Ministry of Digital is so low inside the protocolaire ordre, which is the way they can speak on the Ministry Council, that is so low that we didn't have the ability to speak about digital in every Ministry Council. Trump and Musk just announced the Stargate project. Is 500 billion on the table to speak about the AI. So digital have changed the society that nothing more in the past few decades. The way we live, the way we meet people, the way we work, everything is changing through digital, and we are not making it a priority of our society. If I have one wishes for this year, is this will become the main priority of everyone managing the country and the Europe. Because right now, we are not able to sustain our way of life if we are not putting all the effort on the digital, and AI is just the kick we need to understand what's happening on the digital world. We are making the third revolution around our industry, and as a country which is more under the service and selling the brain, the automation on the brain through the AI have to be something we are thinking about, because we have a problem there. And I don't feel that the problem is actually something we are thinking about right now. And I think it's something we need to focus right now. And the way we can sustain that is through common digital stuff like the open source offer us in Europe, because we need to push forward to this, but we need to decide it's a priority, and we need to fund the companies that actually making the business of making a good world possible in Europe right now.
And so, in a sense, what you're saying that we do need political people to understand that tech is not just IT, that tech now became politics, and every choice of infrastructures, of what we do with data, all of that needs to follow a political vision with people who do embody this vision. And it's not about what can be done, it's about what do we want to do out of it.
I think we just have the best demonstration we can have. Basically, Elon Musk invests all his technical and financial power to put Trump on the power, and he have done that through the tech. So technology is the way we automate the brain. Sure, it's political. And if we don't react right now, we will be doomed. So we need to focus right now at making things right now to be able to sustain the competition. Europe is still the richest part of the world, but we need to be able to produce value and just only consume value coming from USA and China.
And that will be definitely the question of this afternoon, because we're going to have, a keynote about building a strong open source ecosystem for European independence. And that's exactly what we're going to have for the afternoon as well, with vision to action, what we want to see happen in the AI Summit. So let's not forget that, and we won't forget that. I would like to do last round before turning to the audience. A last round into recommendation and wishes, we still, in January, we still can make wish for 2025. You shared your own wish. You want people to seize the emergency and feel like this is not something, it's not a bonus. It's basically like what we need to make a priority. Could each of you, in 30 seconds, please share your wish when it comes to open source AI and the way it grows? Victor, you may start, of course.
Yeah, maybe I would like to argue about cultural change. So I'm super pro competition, but I think many of the initiatives are very fragmented. And also, from what I've observed at JP Morgan, for example, any AI project start with building a baseline with open source, meaning private sectors and private companies have really a lot of incentives of developing and funding open source. So maybe let's not wait for the next industrial policy. Of course, we need European industrial policy, but I think with the cultural change, we can start building right now. Yeah, so this would be my wish, a cultural change and less fragmented initiatives and more funding from the private sector.
Thank you. Anastasia?
Yeah, I'll join what has just been said. European Union kind of engaged lots of money, there are horizons. All of this takes years. Europe doesn't believe in its own regulation. PLAYS is a part of the working group on the code of conduct as a model builder. What we are seeing is that every session, the stakeholders who are participating are more adamant and asking more from the Commission to put, for example, in the training, resume, guidelines, etc. And every time what gets back is very weak document. We all know why. If we are waiting for industrial policy from the European Union to come, we are already doomed. R1, with the question of this round table, has open source AI surpassed proprietary AI? DeepSeek just launched R1, which is basically better than on one at the fraction of the cost. The question is answered. And this is Alibaba. This is not Mistral. Why is it not Mistral? What is the reason? The reason is that in Europe, we don't, in the private companies, we do not even believe that what we apply as what we do in terms of compliance, the rules that we are creating ourselves, is more than a fiction, but a business opportunity, actually. And I completely agree with what has been said, and by multiple people here, that regulation is a business, that privacy is a business, that ethics also, I'm sorry, is a business. But we do need to believe in it and take actions on the, I would say, more on the private side. And then on the public side, there are actually quite simple organizational actions to be taken, which are actually very simple. It's just lowering down the delays of taking decisions for the grants attribution, for the subsidies attribution. This is a question of public administration efficiency. It is insane. As a startup, as of today, one of the most visible ones in terms of our open source initiative, we probably, like in the next 6 months, unless we raise capital with the funds which do not want us to be open source, we won't have funds enough to sustain the team that does R&D and open source, because we will be waiting for the decisions on the consortium, which, yes, we will most probably win, but the team will be gone by now. So it's a question of efficiency, public administration efficiency. And this, of course, should be resolved by the public money, because this is what this money that we are paying as taxpayers is for. And then, on the other hand, we do need to start believing that the things that we as citizens accepted democratically in terms of regulation, they are business opportunities for us. And it, of course, I'm seeing that, of course, the companies are building on open source, but then are they willing to collaborate with the open source solution providers? Not necessarily, because it's very long, because it's, well, once again, so I do think that we do need to start believing that by building open source systems, we will all become stronger, and then there is an interesting share of value between the private companies and the tech providers who are doing open source. And it's not only about buying tokens from the APIs, but we'll also do this.
Thank you so much. Enguerrand, if you have one quick wish for 2025.
Yep, I will wish one wish, maybe one other. It's on the same vibe, but just like maybe to see like a European company emerging as what like Red Hat is doing, for example. So it's more than just open models. It's like open system of ingestion, RAG, like layer detection, all these things, and that will be, and they will maintain and deploy these open source tools to companies. And I mean, I would love to see that, and like a more open systems, not just models.
Thank you so much. Manuel?
Yeah, I think I answered the question already. So.
That is true. Jonathan?
Yeah, half of the value of open source for me is in learning together. So if it's that simple, if you are using Google API, you are not learning a lot, but Google is learning a lot about you. Whereas if you are building a croissant LLM or Colpali or Lucy, everybody is learning. So my wish for 2025 is invest in your knowledge.
Thank you. I will now turn to the audience. Do we have questions? I have one here. Sorry, can you turn on the mic? Yeah, it seems to be working.
As I was saying, my question is about the relationship between politics and AI. As Mr. Quentin said, like his example about Elon Musk and Donald Trump and how they made it politic, AI made it politic, doesn't it make it harder in the future for us to adopt open AI, since it would be in my best interest as a private company to keep it a secret, so I could have more political power and like help my favorite politicians?
Can we take another question so we can do a round of answers? We have one up there. Is the mic working now?
Hi everybody. So I have two questions. One is directed to Anastasia, just to understand how her system is actually assessing the quality and accuracy of data to avoid or to minimize the biases in case of shared data for open AI systems? And the second question is for all the panelists. That is to understand why, if you look at the medical sector, the ethic in the medical sector is addressed by sort of college of many practitioners and people related to I mean, people that philosoph and other people. Why can we not do the same when we talk about tech? It seems that when we talk about tech, we see ethics as a hindrance to the evolution of technologies, which is not the case because it doesn't happen in the medical sector. So why don't we have like a cooperation of people thinking about how we can manage the ethics of technologies and maybe this could be interesting for our politicians to have a better regulation. I think that we are asking politicians to do the regulation of something they don't understand, where we should have practitioners to put or set the boundaries of those technologies when it comes to affecting human beings. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question. Down there.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for the great panel discussion. My question was about foundation models and open source LLMs. I think that we are still restricted to the transparency way of open sourcing AI models because someone has to face the costs of training those models. But should we try to go one step further and gather as public goods common resources on training those models and building open and democratic governance of the very training of those models?
Thank you. We will start to answer those three questions and see if we still have time because we have some announcement to make before the lunch break. On the political side, Quentin, do you feel like responding? Please, all of us, be quick so we can take maybe one last question.
I will answer with a very simple way. We need to assess that the era of capitalism is dead. World Trade Organization is dying. Everybody is making no sense of the trade treaty we have, and we enter in the era of tech feudalism. And I give you the books of Varoufakis and stuff about that. But what we have done is with the increasing revenue of capital, which is breaking the way capitalism works in a traditional way, we enter in a new world. So why we will be using open source against a private model? Because it's better for your company. It's Alibaba that just reveals the best model in the world right now, and it's open source. Why they are using it? Because they weaponize open source, because they need to break the consortium making bigger in the USA, and together we can break the consortium. The way with open source is working is always the same. Making common, digital common, will increase the capacity of making business together. And some part will be open source, some part will be private source, and then we will liberate gradually what we do together because of the value will be better on the common than on the private sector. The thing is, we don't have to be open source in a religious way. We need to build open source commons, not open product, but open source commons that bring together the value. Lucy will make a lot of business for Linagora to making business around Lucy, and that's great. But it's open source because they give them the power to see, okay, you can look inside. So for me, it's not a problem of the political trading between the politics and the businesses because of the open source, because open source is also a power for the people to making the stuff. So it's not a problem for that. But what we need to do right now is to think about the end of capitalism the way we know it.
Thank you, Quentin. Anastasia, there was a question about the training of the...
Yes, about the toxicity filtering of data. So basically, we developed our own classifier based on lots and lots and lots of data that we labeled with the researchers coming from, let's say, different academic backgrounds, specifically in humanities and social sciences, which is quite unusual, let's say, for some reason, when you still develop machine learning models. So the model is called Celadon. It's published on Hugging Face. It's a very lightweight model and can be basically used to not to delete, but just to flag different levels of toxicity, which we explain as toxicity being, let's say, a composite phenomenon based on, let's say, the occurrences of ableism, racism, sexism, and all of these things being explained in a certain way, which of course we do also need to agree with. This was our research approach that is transparent. You can know how we labeled it, to have access to the labeled data set that served for training. But this, of course, are the choices, right? The ethical choices. And of course, if we develop this model for a client, for example, I don't know, for example, in Senegal, we actually had this problem. There would be a category about homosexuality, and this is something that, for example, in Senegal, the models cannot generate statements saying that homosexuality is okay. It's just the law there. So you will have such use cases when you will have to think that what is legal, what is ethical, is a spectrum. Not in a spectrum, but it's different categories that you will need to apply. And just probably very quickly on the question of democratic governance and the digital common goods, and why the enterprises wouldn't want to have something which is very proper to them, which is proprietary to them. I actually think that all of this will happen at once. Actually, there is no reason for all of us to use the most capable model. And I personally don't believe in AGI for a very simple capitalistic reason. If there is AGI, we do not have any competitive advantage one over another as companies if we do have access to the same power. The generalist models, I do believe that they should be built as public goods in a distributed way. For example, for training, there are already experiments for distributed training done right now, and the first models have been trained with the governance on the alignment which should be put in place. And then for the companies starting from open source or even building their own proprietary models, as it happens today for machine learning, for more classic AI models, this is completely normal. And I do think that we should go rather in this more fragmented space instead of, let's say, one model rules it all, whatever it is open or closed source.
Thank you. And for the last question, if I got it right, and let me know who wants to answer that, but basically the question was, why does ethics seem so natural in advancing science, especially in the medicine field? And why does it feel so unnatural, or what does it look like something that could stop innovation when it comes to the tech era? Did I get it right? Yeah, who does want to answer that question? Okay, well, Quentin real quick and then Anastasia, but 30 seconds, I'm gonna stop you if you go
The answer is very simple. Because today we are doomed by lobbyists that say that it will break the innovation. But innovation in constraints and ethical constraints is a good constraint to create good innovations. But today we have few companies, I will not name it, but we all know which are they, and they say it would break the innovation. But we can do a cultural shift and say, as European, we want to have a AI which is ethical. And it will be a good business. Thanks.
Anastasia?
It's a very immature field that AI is. Yeah. Medicine in the 19th century, if we look just at the history, was not driven by such strident ethical considerations, and much more by the needs of some surgeons, doctors to get richer, on multiple levels. So what I'm just trying to say is that we we cannot expect from the field to be as mature in terms of its own self-reflection. However, for this we do have regulation, and ethics is different from regulation, and regulation which is already in place in the European Union. Normally, the only question is left is the operationalization of what AI Act has posited. So basically, how do we respect copyright? How do we ensure that that the biases are not harmful and do not create discrimination? This is operationalization, and this is where we as an open source community should come into play and show that there are real ways to respect these legal obligations.
Thank you so much. Just before we give them a huge round of applause, let me just remind you that we have lunch served now, basically. We're going to have 1 hour break, so please get back in the room at 2 p.m. to talk about the European independence. I think this is a heavy question regarding the news we had this night. We will also open this afternoon the Lucy room, where you can basically, so let me tell you where you can go through there. You can access going through the inside crew. There is there is a space called the Lucy Room in Salle Victor Hugo, starting from 2 p.m., where you can come and try Lucy and exchange with Lucy and just test how does this very new open source LLM works and function. And so for this afternoon, we will have first a keynote about building a strong open source ecosystem and European independence, then the question of universal open source AI. We've been telling quite a lot about languages. This is where we will be saying things about that. Then we have an intervention from someone in the United Nations. Then we have a keynote on AI and the environment and the question of sustainable models. And we will end the day with a roundtable from vision to action takeaways for the AI Action Summit. I thank you all the speakers. I thank you all the audience. Let's see you this afternoon.